Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many of you here bright and early. Nice to have some time to chat. There was something, I cut off the live yesterday before they were quite done. And so something happened that I need to tell you about. I think you might be interested. After the jury left, the issue of Mr. Torres's medical records came up. Do you remember Mr. Owens was supposed to have submitted the trimmed down version of I think it was like 181 pages or something? Anyway, Owens, of course, did not submit that. And so the prosecutor needed time. He needs to know what's going on, what they're planning. And it came out through Owens that this business of submitting all of Mr. Torres's records was Sarah's idea. Because, she wants to say that everything was related to his alleged harm of her. And Owens said he doesn't want to actually submit those records. The defense doesn't want to use that, but Sarah is insisting, right? And finally, so Sarah ended up having to say on the record that she's had a discussion with her attorneys about this issue, that she understands that some decisions are hers and hers alone, and some decisions belong to the lawyers. And this is one of those decisions. And she said on the record that she agrees with their decision not to submit these records. And she reiterated again on the record that she's happy with her defense team and how everything is going. And she even said, in every way. So she is happy in every way with her defense team. And this is great because it makes claiming ineffective assistance of counsel later, that's going to be difficult, if not impossible. And she can't claim, oh, they didn't tell me this, or they just ignored my instructions, etc. So that happened yesterday. D says harm and abuse of Sarah is documented by police, doctors, hospital records, photographs, etc. So for me to say alleged completely dismisses violence against women. This is the comment. And I do want to address that. So everybody who knows me at all knows that I hate DV, and it doesn't matter to me who the victim is. It's important to speak up about it. It's important to address it. It's important to protect victims. But I also know, and I also know through my job, through working, that offenders frequently, almost always, twist things around and blame the victim. And I think it does a disservice to all victims to lie about abuse. I'm not saying that he never did anything to her. I'm not saying that at all. It's not black and white. It's not all or nothing. You can believe that he did do things to her at times. What the story is behind that, whether it was him acting in self-defense or whether it was him as the primary aggressor at times, is up for debate, right? Because we know she lies. We know she used the system against him. And when anybody uses the system against another person, that casts a bad light on every victim. Every time there's a false allegation, and let me tell you, false allegations are not common. They're not as common as you would think. But for the ones that do occur, it makes it harder for every real victim of crime. And when you have reasonable and probable grounds, you have the evidence to believe that an offense was committed to the point that you are following through with a prosecution, then dragging the victim's name through the mud creates a chill. Victims won't want to report. It's already hard for them to report. And in this case, because the victim is a man, shouldn't lessen this at all. It shouldn't matter less because he's a man. And I don't care if the victim is a man, I don't care if it is as extreme as this or if it's just a slap. And the psychological abuse and the power and control, the abuse of the system, all of it is awful regardless of who the victim is. And when I say alleged in this case, I say so because the story of how those injuries occurred is alleged. So when we talk about times when there were convictions, if he was convicted, then it's not alleged anymore. He's convicted. So, the court found beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. But it doesn't negate everything else. So I hope that addresses that sufficiently. And we know Sarah lies. We saw on body cam how she blatantly used the police against him. Jay-Z says, I think you've been very fair through this process. I got crap in the beginning because I said in the beginning of all of this, before I knew what a liar she was, I said, oh my gosh, she is also a victim and this is horrible. I gave her every benefit of the doubt. Even when there were all the red flags, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. And I also know through work that when you're in such a horrible situation, when you're in that dynamic, you aren't thinking straight. When you're living in constant trauma, you're not thinking straight. It's hard to make good decisions. And I know victims lie and cover up to protect the offender. They cover up out of fear. They cover up to protect themselves, and so on and so on. So I know what it looks like. I've dealt with thousands of these cases. She is not, she's the primary aggressor. And even her descriptions on the witness stand of how she was trying to get him focused and manage him. Victims do try to manage things, but not in this way. And anyone who's been through it, who also has seen all of the details of this case and all of her behaviors, will recognize the abuse dynamics within the relationship on her end. So I think you have to look at the whole picture and the whole body of evidence and not simply take her word for it. I do think she makes it harder for real victims, because when you see stuff like this and you know she's full of crap, she's told so many different stories. And even at the times when she was accusing him to police, you can hear her not be able to come up with a story. And the officers are asking, okay, what? How did this happen again? Sorry, can you explain? And she can't. So even then she's lying. So people see this stuff, and then when they hear a real victim's story, they go, "Oh, yeah, you're probably lying." So it does a real disservice. I hate it when someone makes a false accusation. So alleged, yes, because she's a liar, because it wasn't proven, because the evidence wasn't tested, it is still alleged. You can't just trash a victim who is not even alive to defend himself and expect that everybody is just going to accept that vilification of the victim. Victims are vilified all the time by offenders, and it's disgusting. So that's why I say alleged. Erica is saying that you should weed people out who experienced any DV from the jury. Is that what you're saying? I'm not sure if that's what you mean. I don't think, I know there's someone on the jury who has suffered DV, and I would argue that you can't say, oh, that creates bias. I think that would be unfair. You could argue it the other way. You could argue that the jury should be comprised of all people who have suffered DV. Otherwise, they're biased because somebody who has suffered DV understands the dynamics. They understand why people don't leave. They understand why people go back. They understand the games. So I don't think that having that juror on there is a bad thing at all for the prosecution or the defense, right? If everybody's telling the truth. Aaron is saying savior complex is not that uncommon either. Yes. Yes, there is a guy up here in Canada. Oh, his first name is Basil. He he was a serial abuser, right? He got into a relationship with a woman, and he had this savior complex. Like he's going to fix everybody, and his values are right, and everybody else's aren't. And his perception is right, and nobody else's are. And he was going to fix this woman. Well, she didn't want to be fixed. He went on a killing spree because she tried to break up with him. And he used this whole savior thing as justification for that. And he even sat in a police interview for hours justifying. And that was his justification. And when we do threat assessment, we look for justification. If the offender or a potential offender feels justified in his or her actions, they're more likely to follow through on a bad plan, right? They're more likely to take that action. So we look at how much justification they believe they have. And it doesn't matter whether they're actually justified, they just have to believe they're justified. And that justification gets them over that hurdle, that inhibition to carry out an act. I hope I'm making sense because I'm trying to condense 30 years of experience and education and everything into a couple of sentences. Jane said, I saw the black eyes picture, also the picture of Sarah sitting in her backyard, was taken by George. Oh, I didn't catch that. But they manipulated that picture in the original. You can see George clearly. What? Oh, so it wasn't George who took the picture, you're saying? Interesting. GC is saying, I'm still stuck on her yelling to George's brother that he choked her on the phone. George was violent but didn't attack her for it. Interesting. Yeah, because a real abuser might have turned around and said, shut the F up, B, right? There would have been consequences for that. True crime boozer says Sarah definitely feels justified. Oh, yeah. She feels justified in everything she does. She thinks she's right. And everybody's lying except for her, according to her. Jay Z says, I think the black eye pick was enhanced by makeup or marker. It did. It was interesting to me because there wasn't, normally, black eyes aren't just black, right? There's a lot of greens and blues and browns as it heals. So that coloring changes depending on the stage of healing it's at. So that's interesting to me. And, again, we don't know really what that's from. Also, witnesses say that Mr. Torres also had scratches and bruises and black eyes. So, good morning, Ottawa. Moon Goddess says that black eye picture looks so strange to me. Yeah, yeah, I think I would remember we're seeing it through a television camera and on a monitor in a courtroom. So we're not getting a real close look. Also, they're blown up huge. So we don't have the scale that CSI would put on there. There's a lot we don't have. We don't have the comparison, the date of injury to when the picture was taken, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, Kathy's asking about my book. It's fiction. It's called Fire and by Laurie Reese. And if you're in Canada, it's in chapters Indigo, UK. It's at Barnes and Noble, Blackwell's. I think there's a few other places. Amazon, I think, has it all over. Annie's saying, I was so disappointed by the prosecutor yesterday. I felt at times underwhelmed when they ended the cross. I thought, what? What? That's it? And I'm thinking about it. Somebody correctly pointed out that, he might not want to go at her too hard in that moment because if any jurors are feeling sympathetic for her, it might create more sympathy for her. Also, the number of lies and the so much that was just illogical was overwhelming. As we were watching, I know I stopped and commented a lot, but I could have even commented more and we would be here for a flippin' month. There is just so much to disassemble and it's hard to do sort of like right off the top in the moment. So I think that Mr. J and Mr. Cacciatore have a longer game in mind, and I think it's going to come out. So I hope it's going to all come out. I think it's easy for us to see because we followed all the details and we know all the background and all of that. The jury doesn't. And that's the part that gets me worried. And I know I've been in court thinking, how can the jury not see this? Isn't this obvious? And you think that something is obvious to you, but it may not be to the jury. So that makes me a bit nervous. Suzanne is asking, Mr. J asked about food. Is it because in the autopsy report it said that George hadn't eaten in 2 days? Oh, you know what? I didn't catch that. That's a good catch, Suzanne. I don't know. Good day, Addie. I see you. Amy's pointing out also there's a whole rebuttal case. So let's hold on for now. Yep, it's not over till it's over. Jane, amazing how criminals answer every question when the defense asks the question, but when the prosecutor asks, they don't remember. Yeah, how convenient. BJM, sorry, says she gave a look to Owens at the beginning of her cross yesterday that showed she's enjoying this. Maybe. Mad Mystic is saying I always had a fear that the prosecution was too confident. Yeah. Hey, you know what? I got to check the court stream. Oh, we have something. So today I am going to stream through Trial TV. So if you don't like commentary, go over to Trial TV Live. They're on YouTube. They have graciously granted me permission to stream through them. I really appreciate that. They were really nice to me too when I needed something. So big shout out and thanks to them. Sometimes the court turns off their stream. So if that happens, I'll jump over to another stream. But I would like to try this and I would like to give them a shout out. They're a small channel, but I think they deserve some more followers. Joyce is saying commentary is part of the fun. Yeah. Mace says Sarah was suffering from JAS, Jodi Arias syndrome. Frauke, a couple of people told me yesterday to stop commenting so much. Good morning. Thank you, BJM, for the donation for Watson. Yeah, we're going to get sticks. I've ordered a new toy, so when we get time, we'll have to do a video of unveiling that. Elle is saying Trial TV Live are excellent. Yeah, they were very gracious. I was very appreciative of that. Jane says, we enjoy your facial expressions. Yeah. There were one time I got called to chambers in court because apparently my facial expressions were distracting. I don't do it on purpose. So yeah, I know it's funny. I don't know I'm doing it though. Here we go.
Good morning, everyone. Madam Clerk's going to go ahead and call the case to order.
Case number 2020 CF2603, State of Florida, Sarah Boone, charged and up names for the record, beginning with the state.
David Ketchner on behalf of the state.
William J. for the state.
Defense.
James Owens for Ms. Boone.
Tony Henderson for Sarah Boone.
Kevin Beck on behalf of Sarah Boone.
Ms. Boone, raise your right hand to be sworn in case you swear or affirm the testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you state your full name and date of birth for the record for me?
Sarah Boone, 10-10-7-7.
Ms. Boone is seated at counsel's table wearing a dark gray suit jacket and a maroon blouse. She is in custody. However, she's not in any restraints, so we will be continuing.
Did you notice her volume? Much more confident. I think she is more confident.
To stand as our jury enters and exits. State, are there any housekeeping matters we need to address this morning before we bring in our panel? Defense.
Judge, I don't know if you got the email last night
In addition to the one I received this morning, yes, sir.
Dr. Harper did get in last night after midnight. She was over at the hotel, but in addition, we may recall the phone extraction expert. She's not on the list.
Okay, understood. All right, are we ready to bring in our panel?
Yes.
Okay, all right, very good. Let's go ahead and stand and bring in our panel.
Did you hear that? They're calling a phone extraction expert on the defense side. Very interesting. Somebody in the comments just said that maybe she feels more confident because she feels like the pressure is gone and it's over. Do you mean because she testified? I think that's what you mean. Morning, Captain Katie. L. Rush says, I almost don't want to watch anymore because I feel like the prosecution is throwing it. Don't give up. Just because it doesn't come crashing down with one big boom doesn't mean they aren't going to fight back. I hope they're just going with a bit of a different strategy. They've got a lot of balls in the air, a lot of variables to consider. And they're seeing jury reactions too that we can't see. So just don't give up yet. It's not over.
All right, jury's in.
I like how the judge smiles at the jury. You know, acknowledges them and everything.
State, do you recognize our jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, do you recognize our jury?
Yes.
All right, everyone can be seated. Members of the jury, good morning. Welcome back to 12 Alpha of the Orange County Courthouse. I hope you had a great evening. If you could, again, just by a show of hands, that you complied with the court's instructions for the overnight break. Record reflect all hands have been raised. Members of the jury, at this point in time, the defense is going to continue with their evidence and testimony presentation. And I'm going to ask them to call their first witness at this time. Mr. Owens, you may proceed, sir.
At this time, the defense calls Deputy Ramirez-Delgado.
Please swear or affirm that the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I swear.
Good morning. You can be seated. And can you please state and spell your name for the record for me?
Yes, sir. My name is Jessica, first name Jessica, Jessica. First last name is Ramirez, Ramirez. Second last name is Delgado, Delgado.
Thank you, ma'am. You may inquire, sir.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, sir.
Ma'am, how are you?
Just the fact that there is a police officer called to the stand on the defense side is going to have an impact.
Employed.
I am a reserve deputy with the Orange County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been employed with the sheriff's department?
7 years.
Back on July the 25th of 2018, how were you employed at that time?
I was a full-time deputy sheriff for the agency.
On that date, ma'am, did you have the occasion, due to your duties, to report or to go to 4748 France Lane, apartment number 3?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall what you were going there for, the purpose?
Yes, sir. I was a backup deputy for a call involving a male kicking a female in the face. So it came out as a domestic call.
Okay. And was it another officer who also responded?
Yes, sir. He was the primary.
Okay. Ma'am, while you were there, did you have contact with Sarah Boone?
Yes, sir.
While having contact with Miss Boone, were you able to observe any injuries?
Yes,
to
sir.
her person?
Yes, sir. She had swelling and bruising in her right eye.
And ma'am, were you able to make contact with Mr. George Torres?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to notice any injuries on his person?
Yes, sir. He had red markings and some abrasions around his neck.
Ma'am, at a certain point in time, did you place Miss Boone under arrest?
Yes, sir. I detained her and placed her in my vehicle.
Ma'am, at that time, do you recall or remember Miss Boone asking you, "Why am I in trouble?"
Yes, sir.
And without saying what you said, but did you respond to her?
Yes, sir.
After that, ma'am, do you remember Miss Boone asking you, "Why?" "Because I fucking fought back"?
Yes, sir.
Just because Boone said that at the time of her arrest doesn't mean that's true. If there are police officers in the chat, and I think there are today, you know that people getting arrested lie all the time.
I can have one more.
Yes, sir.
No further questions.
Thank you. Any cross-examination?
During the course of your investigation, you or the other responding deputies spoke to Mr. Torres as well.
Yes, sir.
After concluding all of your investigation, which involved talking to both Mr. Torres and to Ms. Boone and making your observations of the two of them, did you all make final decisions about how to handle your investigation?
The other deputy, which at the time was Deputy Zito, was the one that made that determination.
Okay. But that was collectively what you all looked at was statements from Ms. Boone and Mr. Torres, correct?
Yes, sir.
And your physical observations of both persons?
Yes.
And then whatever else you may have observed on scene?
Yes, sir.
And do you take into account people's demeanor when they are giving you statements, when assessing their credibility?
Yes, sir.
No other questions?
Any redirect examination?
No, Your Honor.
Can this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
Very interesting to me, and I don't know that the jury is going to catch on to this, that it's this officer who is the backup officer who's called, and the primary officer is not called to the stand. I mean, unless they're going to bring it up. It was the primary responder there, the lead in that case, who ultimately made the determination that, yeah, they both got to go down. So the only reason the defense is calling this witness is because Sarah made that remark during her arrest. So we are cherry picking now. Put the lead officer up on the stand. Yeah, no, because it won't suit them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Defense, call your next witness.
At this time, the defense calls Deputy John Alden.
Oh, I may be proven wrong in 1 second. Maybe this is the primary.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Sir, good morning. Can you state and spell your name for the record?
John Alden, John, Alden.
All right, thank you, sir. You may be seated. Mr. Henderson, you may inquire.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Sir, how are you employed? How are you employed?
I'm employed with the Orange County Sheriff's Office as a corporal.
Back on August the 28th of 2019, how were you employed?
I was a
Okay, so I just want to point out, August, that this officer is talking about a separate incident. So the officer previous to this was talking about July. This one is talking about August. And I think it's really easy when you're listening to these things to miss things like that, like dates. So hopefully the jurors are taking notes.
deputy in the Uniform Patrol Division in Sector 2.
As a part of your job duties that day, did you have the occasion to respond to 4748 France Lane, number 3?
Yes.
What was the purpose?
There ended up being a battery call.
And, sir, were you the lead officer on this case?
Yes.
Were there any other backup officers there with you?
I believe so.
Sir, on that date, August the 28th of 2019, did you come in contact with Sarah Boone?
Yes.
Sir, on that date, did you observe any injuries on Sarah Boone?
I observed redness on the left side of her neck and what to be an old injury to her right eye.
Sir, on August 28th of 2019, did you come in contact with George Torres?
Yes.
And did you notice any injuries on Mr. Torres?
Yes. He had some redness on it by his left eye.
Sir, on that day, was Mr. Torres placed under arrest?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any cross-examination?
Yes. Is it fair to say that Mr. Torres had quite a few marks on him?
From my report, I remember marking the redness by his left eye.
And did you have your body-worn camera activated when you responded to this call?
I believe so.
And so that would be the best evidence of both video and audio as to what occurred while you were on scene.
It would, especially since this happened 4 years or 5 years ago now.
Beautiful. Beautiful. This is a good time to clarify what the best evidence rule is. I hope people are interested in this. It seems that some people are not quite understanding it. Best evidence does not mean the evidence most likely to prove a point. Best evidence refers to accuracy. So it's usually about audio video recordings, transcripts, contracts, like written material. So if I have an original receipt as evidence and I have a photocopy of a receipt, best evidence is the original, and court always wants best evidence. In a previous motions hearing, Owens tried to use what he called a transcript, but it was he took that, or someone in his office took that. Turns out it wasn't accurate. And that's why the prosecution said, no, best evidence is the actual video. Owens basically had a transcript of a transcript. So I hope I've explained that clearly. If I haven't, remind me when there's a break to talk about it again.
And did Mr. Torres refuse to say what happened that day?
He did.
Based on the conclusion of your investigation, which involved talking to Ms. Boone and attempting to talk to Mr. Torres, as well as your visual observations of both them and the scene, is that how you all reach your conclusions?
Yes.
No other questions?
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Can this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Jay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
With the DV victim behavior arguments, people are saying, well, you know, Sarah lied about it. It's common for DV victims to lie to cover up. That's true. And here, Mr. Torres doesn't report on Sarah despite having marks. Okay. So he is fitting the profile of a DV victim. Now, on the flip side, you could argue he just chose to remain silent because he didn't want to get in trouble. So, things to consider.
Defense, you can call your next witness.
Judge, may we approach him?
Yes.
I'm going to try and fast forward past the approach.
Next witness.
Okay.
Judge, at this time, the defense calls Deputy Costler. Or detective, excuse me.
I just saw a comment in the chat and I want to highlight that. Somebody said, if you're a male victim, it's really scary. It's extra scary because of how quickly the script can be flipped on you. And that is true. I think that is something important to keep in mind. Police officers know this, by the way. They have seen all kinds of things that make your hair stand on end. These things are hard to tease out at the scene.
Please swear or affirm that the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes. Thank you.
Good morning again. Could you state your full name and date of birth for the record? Or, I'm sorry, full name and spell it for us.
It's Chelsea Ketzel, Chelsey. Last name is Koepsell.
All right, thank you. Counselor, you may inquire.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
In relation to this case, on February the 26th of 2020, did you have the occasion to interview Abraham Marino?
Yes, I did.
Was that interview recorded, ma'am?
Yes, it was.
You remember as part of that interview that Mr. Marino tell you that he had had contact with Sarah Boone on February the 24th of 2020?
Are you asking the night of the incident when police were called out?
Yes, the next morning.
The day that we were called.
That you were called out.
Okay.
The 24th.
So, yes, he did have contact with her, but it wasn't in the morning. It was while we were there.
While you were there?
Yes.
Okay. What time did you get there? That's probably what's going on.
I got there around 14:20 hours, which would be 2:20 in the afternoon.
Okay. So the afternoon on the 24th.
No, it was later. I recall, I believe I was doing paperwork in my vehicle. So it would have been at some point during the investigation, but it wasn't, I didn't notice him until, I'm not sure if I noticed him until before or after Sarah was interviewed.
All right. But to his interview part, the interview, did he tell you in the interview that he had had contact with Miss Boone on that day?
Yes, he did.
Did he tell you at that time that Miss Boone had made a statement to him?
Yes, he did.
Do you remember what that statement was?
I don't wish to quote what he stated. So I don't know the exact verbiage, but he basically replayed what, I'm not sure if he replayed what exactly occurred that day, but I do know he mentioned something about, she mentioned being dragged down the stairs a couple days prior.
Oh, he is playing such a game here, and this detective is doing great on the stand. This is an example. If you ever have to be a witness, if any lawyer asks you a question and you're not 100% sure of the exact answer, to just tell the truth. And that is, you're not 100% sure. What Henderson is trying to do is trying to get Chelsea to say that witness made a statement in his recorded interview that he didn't make. The witness made the statement on the witness stand. So Henderson is going to try and make her look bad because the witness said something on the stand that was a little bit different than what he said in the recording. So if she came out and said, oh yeah, he said XYZ, and she names the statement, and namely that is that Sarah wanted to teach George a lesson. If Chelsea came out with that, then it would discredit her. So she is doing a fantastic job. The defense may well play that interview, and I think it's good if they do. I think it's good for the prosecution if they do.
Did he say to you during that interview that Sarah Boone told us that a couple of days ago they had gotten into a fight where he grabbed her by her hair and dragged her down the steps?
I would assume that he's reading my report, and that does sound similar to what my report should say.
So,
sorry to interrupt so soon, but the other thing that Henderson is doing right now is getting the detective to repeat what the witness said, and what the witness said was repeating what Sarah said. So Sarah's narrative gets inserted over and over and over. Well, you know what? Just because Sarah said something to a witness while she was trying to make sure that she could control the narrative, just because she said something, doesn't mean the thing is true.
this statement was given on the 27th of February. I'm sorry, the 26th of February. Would you
Yes.
agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay. The contact and the statement that Ms. Boone made to Mr. Moreno was on the 24th of February. Is that correct?
Repeat the question. I'm sorry.
When Mr. Moreno is saying that Ms. Boone came up to him and made this statement that we just talked about,
Yes,
that was on February the 24th. Is that correct?
that is correct.
So when she said a couple of days ago, that would have brought it back to February the 22nd. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes.
If it happened. Sarah's lying.
Ma'am, during that interview with you, did Mr. Moreno ever indicate to you that when he had contact with Ms. Boone on the 24th, that Sarah Boone told him what happened was an accident? Did he say that Sarah Boone stated that she was teaching him a lesson and things got out of hand and that she fell asleep?
I don't recall the entirety of that being accurate. Yeah, I don't recall the entirety of what he just said being accurate.
She is so good on the stand. A lot of witnesses feel pressure to come up with an answer, and she's just telling the truth. This is great. I hope they're forced to play the recording. The witness did not say that on the recording, but that's fine. He did say it on the stand.
Accurate.
Do you remember him saying that at all?
He did say that she had, I believe he said on the recording, passed out. So that's why, like, part of the statements might be accurate, but
Ma'am, would it refresh your memory if you were to see the recorded statement?
his recorded statement,
Yes.
transcription?
Yes.
Sure, yeah, great.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
He's going to make her read the whole stinking transcript and say, is that in there? And she's going to say no. And so he's impeaching the previous witness
I
in
don't recall all the
absentia.
statements that you asked, or the way you asked it, but
Would it help if I repeat it?
sure, yeah.
Okay.
You asked, like, you said multiple statements, so
Yes, ma'am.
this was a, like, 11-minute interview.
All right. The statement would be that Sarah Boone stated to Mr. Moreno that she was teaching him a lesson and things got out of hand and that she fell asleep. And I'm wanting to know if
Did you say, okay, I thought I heard you say passed out the first time. I'm not sure if you said passed out or fell asleep.
fell asleep.
Fell asleep, okay.
And what I'm asking is there any indication that he told you that statement on the date of that interview on the 26th?
I think this is improper. If Henderson wants to impeach Moreno or challenge Moreno on whether or not Boone made this statement, then Henderson should have provided Moreno with the transcript. Here is a transcript of your interview with detectives. Do you see in there where you said this? And then he could have said, is your memory better now or then? That sort of thing. But Henderson didn't do that. Personally, I think this is improper impeachment. I think this is, I just think this is improper.
Sorry, I'm trying to go to the part where we talked about that.
Yes, ma'am. Take your time.
Okay, so like I had stated, there were certain things that I thought was accurate from your statement. He stated, do I just read exactly what it says? Do you need like the number next to it or anything?
Yes, I have no problem with you reading what he said.
Okay, then she,
Your Honor, I would object.
Approach.
Best evidence would also be viva voce. So the witness himself. And they're trying to pull this through her. This is ridiculous. The prosecution did object, by the way.
Ma'am, you cannot read the statement at this time.
okay.
Thank you. You may continue, Mr. Henderson.
He described,
Hang on. Just wait for a question,
so
okay?
sorry.
It's okay.
Yes, sorry.
Ma'am, in anywhere in that interview, you see reference to this statement that Sarah stated that she was teaching him a lesson and things got out of hand and that she fell asleep.
No to the first two parts of your question. I heard passed out the first time you asked me this question, and that's why I said that part of it was accurate, because he did say that she passed out in his statement. That was what Sarah told him.
Okay, did she say she was teaching him a lesson? Is that in there?
No,
And things got out of hand. Is that in there?
no, I don't recall that.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
And again, ma'am, this interview was on February the 26th of 2020. Is that correct?
Yes, it was.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any cross-examination?
No other questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Can this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
State?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Defense? Call the next witness.
I believe Dr. Brandon is here now, Judge.
All right.
Make
This doctor, is this the one with the weird past, or is this the other one? Does anyone know? Which one was the one with the storage unit?
Judge, may we approach?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to fast forward past the approach. Squid is saying, so far the defense has an underwhelming case based on hearsay and unprovable evidence. Nikki's asking, shouldn't we have Dr. Harper first? Well, that is up to the defense. If that is her witness, right? If that's the defense's witness, then the defense can call their witnesses in whatever order that they like. Oh, Pamela's
Members
saying,
of the jury, we're just waiting on a witness. They are using the facilities outside. So as soon as they're done, we'll bring in our next witness. Thank you for your patience.
so somebody's saying Brannon was from a different trial. So he's not the storage unit guy, right? Right. He testified in the Marcia Thompson case. Okay. I'm just going to keep hitting fast forward here. Oh, Berkland is the dodgy one. Thank you. Okay.
At this time, the defense would call Dr. Michael Brandon.
Here we go. I think Werner, Captain Katie, I think Werner is on the prosecution side.
Please swear or affirm that the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Doctor, good morning.
morning,
Could you
Your Honor.
state and spell your name for the record for us?
Michael Brandon, B-R-A-N-N-O-N.
All right, thank you. Counselor, you may inquire.
Thank you. Dr. Brandon, good morning.
Good morning.
Hold on a second. Didn't he appear on court TV talking about this very case? Didn't he suggest that she might not fit battered spouse syndrome? Am I getting something mixed up there? I thought I saw him on court TV.
Spry, having just traveled from Miami to Orlando.
Yes,
Is that not correct? Okay.
it was a good drive.
Would you please describe for the jury your background, training, and experience, both in forensic psychology as well as battered women's syndrome?
Sure. So I'm a psychologist licensed in the state of Florida. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. That's from a university called Nova University. I also have a master's degree in psychology. I received that in 1980, also in psychology. And I received my doctoral degree in psychology after a year internship where I worked with severely mentally ill individuals in Hialeah, Florida. In 1988, I finished my degree requirements for my doctorate in psychology. And in 1990, I was licensed as a psychologist. I've been operating as a psychologist since then, since 1990. Originally, I started off doing the work that most people kind of think about when they think about psychologists, doing therapy, counseling with people, helping them through with their problems, things like that. In 1994, I began on a career almost quite accidentally as a forensic psychologist when I testified in my first case in front of a jury. And from that time on, I've been doing mostly forensic psychology. My practice very quickly changed from that time on. I'm currently the co-director of the Institute for Behavioral Sciences and the Law, and anywhere between 80 and 90% of all my work now is related to some legal or court-related matter in the ways in which mental health interfaces or impacts or helps to give opinions about various legal issues. I've taught rather extensively in the area of forensic psychology. I teach to mostly legal audiences, but oftentimes, too, I speak to groups of psychology students wanting to sit up here and do what I'm doing as well. I make long drives and then come up here and talk to people about cases. I also currently on the staff, the adjunct faculty staff for the School of Psychiatry at Florida Atlantic University. I help to train their forensic psychiatrists, so not just psychologists, but psychiatrists in terms of doing this work as a psychologist or as a psychiatrist, a mental health professional who gives opinions in the courtroom.
And are you also required to update your educational background and knowledge as a forensic psychologist?
Yes, sir. So every 2 years we're required to get 40 continuing education credits to maintain our license. And part of that is we have to, on a regular basis, update our work in domestic violence or battered women's syndrome. So we have to take those courses. We're all required, whether you're a forensic psychologist or not, to take that coursework. So as part of our requirements, we also have to take separate coursework in regards to domestic violence as a general term, or intimate partner violence. But along with that comes discussion as well with battered spouse, or what's oftentimes called battered person syndrome now.
And I apologize. I'm kind of bouncing around here, Doctor. I apologize again. For the uninitiated, just exactly what do you mean by forensic psychology?
So forensic psychology is a division of psychology. Most people don't think about that as often when they think about psychologists. But forensic psychologists are individuals who have degrees in psychology who are working to help to answer questions that.
I'm seeing conversation in the chat. Who's paying this guy? He's a professional witness, all that. And why is he giving his resume? He's giving his resume because he has to establish that he is indeed qualified to be an expert witness and testify to this subject matter. Some people are saying the defense is paying him, the state is paying him. It is the defense who is paying him. He is a defense witness in this case. Expert witnesses who have any integrity, and I'm telling you, I know a lot of them because I was one. They're not going to lie for a paycheck, okay? They give the facts, they give their expertise. If the lawyer wants to argue those facts and that information one way or another way, that is up to the lawyers. So when I see an expert witness, I do not automatically go to, professional witness or whose side they're on. I don't think that, and maybe that's because I know expert witnesses and I have been in that position. So don't automatically make a judgment. You can make a judgment if he says something that goes contrary to the body of research in the field. Then you can start picking that apart. We'll see what the prosecution does with this.
Come up in the legal system. It could be in criminal cases like we're here for today, answering various criminal questions, giving opinions about those questions. Or it could be in other settings like family settings, divorce proceedings, or sometimes civil settings like personal injury. Someone's claiming some emotional damage or something has happened to them. So forensic psychology is really the way that we use the science of psychology to help give opinions about various legal matters.
Now, what is the DSM or the DSM-5?
So the DSM it stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's kind of our code book, if you will, to help us to know what the different symptoms are for different mental health disorders, whether it's major depression or schizophrenia or anxiety. So it gives us a code book of here's the criteria you have to meet in order to have that diagnosis. And then we're able to utilize that in terms of either treatment, so even insurance billing, but being able to inform patients too about what condition we think that they're suffering from. It's been updated many times over the years. It started at just DSM, and now it's at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5th edition, text revised. So we've gone through a lot of revisions over the years to kind of fine-tune in an empirical or scientific way what the elements are, if you will, of various mental health conditions.
Now, you've been asked to testify today in regards to battered women's syndrome. Is the battered women's syndrome identified or located within the DSM-5?
So it is not. It is not a diagnostic category in the DSM-5 or other coding books as well. There's others besides the DSM. That's just the most popular one. But it's not a formal diagnosis that it is contained within that book, a classification manual that I just told you about.
That's an important fact, and this goes to his credibility. Guys, I really do think he's a professional, whether you like his style or not, or agree or disagree, whatever. The guy's qualified, okay? He just right here said, no, battered spouse syndrome is not in the DSM, and I think that's an important point. So he's not trying to be shifty about it.
Within your field of forensic psychology, however, is there a subcategory that is located within the DSM-5 that experts would recognize as a DSM diagnosis?
Yes, sir.
And what is that, sir?
So that category would be in the trauma section of the DSM-5 TR. There's a whole category on trauma disorders, and it's most closely related to something that we call post-traumatic stress disorder. That isn't the only trauma disorder, but that's the one that what used to be called battered women's syndrome, now I refer to it as battered person syndrome, but all of it really is more connected to a trauma disorder like post-traumatic stress disorder.
Now, testify on criminal matters, do you also testify? You indicated also on personal injury cases and emotional. That would be civil, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In your experience, you've testified as an expert, as a forensic psychologist. Have you testified for, and today you're testifying for the defense or were called by the defense. Do you also testify for the state of Florida or other states within this country?
Yes to both of those. I've testified in other states. I also testify for both the prosecution, the state or government, depending if it's federal or if it's a state case, and also for the defense. So I really get appointments and hired by both sides.
About how many times have you testified?
Wow. At last count, it was about 1,500 times. It's over that, way over that now. That was from a few years ago. I testify in a lot of different kinds of hearings and trials over the course of mostly in Florida, but in other states as well.
Now, you're familiar with the fact that there is a special jury instruction that's been recognized by the Florida Supreme Court.
Approach.
They're going to try and get stuff about a jury instruction in through a witness here. Come on. And it's the judge who kiboshed that approach. So I'm just going to fast forward. Honestly, guys, never mind. I already said my opinion on experts. When I say they're on one side or another, it's not that they're on that side. It's that side is paying them for their opinion. So it doesn't mean that they mold their opinion to that side. And I've had defense lawyers talk to me and decide not to use my services because my opinion didn't line up with what they wanted. So, that happens too.
You testified as to battered women syndrome, battered person syndrome. Are there other synonyms or similar names for what you're describing, in particular battered spouse syndrome?
Well, we talk about it in terms of trauma disorders like post-traumatic stress disorder, but the way when it's applied to the legal system, it's called battered wife, or that was the original terminology for it, battered wife syndrome or battered person syndrome. So really depends on your setting. So in this setting, we oftentimes talk about this particular condition that I've been asked to talk about today, is really referred to as battered spouse syndrome.
And have you been asked to give your opinion as a legal expert on battered spouse syndrome?
Yes, sir.
How frequently have you been asked to do that?
I've been involved in about 100 cases of just that alone. I've been involved in some sort of testimony about 50 times.
And you indicated that you testified for the state. You testified for the defense. You testified in state cases, federal cases. Could you break down on a percentage basis the number of times you testified for the state versus testifying for the defense?
It's really close in terms of.
I find this interesting. So I want to before I forgot, he may be here simply to educate on battered persons syndrome. I like that he said persons because it includes men. Men can be and are victims. I would like to see the prosecution at some point out or have an expert point out how Mr. Torres fits the criteria for battered persons syndrome. So we don't know here whether he's going to simply educate or whether he's going to talk about this particular case. We're going to have to see. And, I lost my other point. Okay, if I think of it, I'll bring it up. I know. The fact that he worked for both the prosecution and defense. If you're an expert, it doesn't matter whether you always worked for one side or the other, because the bottom line is the body of knowledge in your field is the body of knowledge. And so it doesn't matter who uses it. It's like if you looked up a word in the dictionary, it doesn't matter who uses it. It's not a side, right? So they ask this for the benefit of the jury because they know that the layperson is going to see it differently, much like many of you in the chat are seeing it differently.
The last time we looked at it, it was about 50-50. On most cases, like for instance, if there's a case that involves battered spouse, potentially battered spouse or battered wife syndrome, I'm usually called by the defense first because they raise the issue. If you're called by the prosecution, whether it be federal or state, what oftentimes happens is it's in response to a defense expert that's been called. So do I agree or disagree with that other expert? So I'm usually, the call usually comes first from the defense, but in terms of who I'm hired by, it's pretty even. It's about 50-50.
Now, this time, Your Honor, I'll proffer the witness as an expert in the field of forensic psychology.
Yes, approach.
I'm going to fast forward past the approach.
Still sustained. Mr. Beck, you may continue.
Yep. So they objected, the prosecution objected to something. I didn't catch the grounds, but whatever it was, after approach, the judge sustained it.
Has battered spouse syndrome been accepted, to your knowledge, in the Florida court system?
Yes, sir.
Objection, legal conclusion.
Sustained.
Can you describe the classic system or systemology wherein an individual might necessarily suffer and then exhibit symptoms of battered women syndrome?
Yes. So battered spouse syndrome is a woman, usually a woman's response. Doesn't have to be, but that's a classic historical research went into how women respond in situations in which there's intimate partner violence, when they've been the victim of violence. Now we know, of course, in other kinds of relationships, men can be a victim of it as well, or whether it's a heterosexual or homosexual relationship, that both men and women can be victims. But we still know the majority of those individuals that are diagnosed with that condition or given that condition, classified with that condition, are women.
Bless you.
We do know that it's a reaction, a strategy that's developed by the person who's being abused to someone who's abusing them in an intimate partner situation. And essentially what they're doing is they've made a determination that they can't effectively escape from the abuse. They can't just leave for some reason. They feel in danger or they've been threatened if they leave that something bad will happen to them. So it's a cognitive or thinking.
I just want to stop here to highlight what he just said. He is absolutely correct. And the key here is the ability to leave, the ability to flee, the ability to get away. Sarah returned to the Torres home where George was staying with her son, no less, to pick him up repeatedly. She said so in her interrogation. I kept doing it. So much so that Mr. Torres' father got mad. She will claim that he was pursuing her. Also, on this point of the victim being able to leave or not leave, who had control of the phone? Sarah, not Mr. Torres. Who had the car? Sarah. Who had a place to go? Sarah went to Brian's. Who said, well, I would just leave and go to Brian's. I would go upstairs and read a book. And he didn't pursue her. And not once have we heard a threat or an allegation of a threat from him saying, if you leave, XYZ will happen. So who was in the position of not being able to flee? That element is not present in this case. She does not have battered spouse syndrome, in my opinion, but hey, I am not the expert in that particular field. Let's keep going.
Thinking strategy on the part of the person being abused that I have to develop some coping skills or ways of protecting myself or maybe even loved ones as well from some form of imminent violence or danger or lethality. Something bad will happen to me if I don't develop a way of handling this abuse, this constant abuse that's coming towards me. So the battered wife syndrome is really a way of thinking. It's a psychological change that happens with a victim in terms of the way they cope and strategize to stay safe for themselves and other loved ones as well, oftentimes.
I'm going to ask a really silly question, if I may, Doctor.
And what he just said here about finding ways of managing to stay safe, that is also true. I've seen that a ton. Officers in the chat have seen that as well. It also applies to Mr. Torres and how he managed, and, they minimize and all of that. So that applies to Torres.
I don't know if you've noticed a bruise across the bridge of my nose this morning.
I did see that when I come in. Yes, sir.
Okay. This weekend, hypothetically, if an individual was digging around in the garbage, the lid fell down and cut his nose, the bridge of his nose wide open, would you as a forensic psychologist anticipate, or a psychologist in general, anticipate that there might be a physical or a psychological reaction or response to that degree of trauma?
So I don't know if it would be trauma or not. It could be, depending on the degree of the injury and the pain and things like that. But certainly you'd view that garbage can differently as you approached it. So it changes your psychology or the way that you look at that particular situation or that particular object. So by viewing it differently, you may engage in different behaviors. You may approach it differently. You may have somebody else approach it. You may approach it with both hands up. So it changes your behavior and your thinking about that garbage can.
Does that also apply to interpersonal relationships?
So it certainly can. No two people always react the same way to every situation. One person's trauma is not a trauma to another person. But for people who do develop battered spouse syndrome, they do begin to change the way they view the person who's abusing them and what they have to do in order to maintain either their life or their safety, their physical safety in terms of their behavior and interactions with that person.
Now, is there a specific set of criteria that a psychologist, forensic psychologist, would necessarily rely upon in attempting to make a diagnosis or assessment of battered women syndrome?
Yes, sir.
And what are those criteria?
Well, you'd want to see one if some type of abuse has occurred. That abuse can be physical, it can be sexual, it can be emotional, or it can just be the threat of abuse or bad things that's going to happen to you. So there has to be something bad that's happened or that's threatened to be happening over a period of time. So abuse has to be present in order for this to be underway.
Okay, let's go through these with the doctor as he does. So abuse has to be present, and it can be any number of forms of abuse or a threat that something bad will happen. Well, Sarah, we know, has choked Mr. Torres, has physically gone after Mr. Torres. We know this, and she has a history of something. So abuse occurred physically. We know abuse occurred emotionally or psychologically because she controlled everything, including how well he focused, including what activities he would do, what music he would listen to, etc., etc. Okay? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if she controlled when he went to the bathroom, for Pete's sake. And threat that something bad is going to happen. Sarah let him know that if you don't do what I tell you, I will call the police. And she is caught on body cam video stating to the police, put the fear of the police into him. And then when she wanted him back, she comes running out of the townhouse. She doesn't want him taken away, not because she's stuck in the cycle necessarily, but because she had finished punishing him and then wanted her toy back. So far, the criteria applies to the victim in this case, who is Mr. Torres.
Abuse, there's no battered wife syndrome. But that's not enough. There also has to be what's called coercive control. Coercive control is really keeping the person's social interactions, overseen on a regular basis, controlling money, controlling preferences, even TV preferences, sometimes social media, looking at social media that the person is accessing or looking at, who they're talking to on Facebook, who they're texting. So it's a combination of abuse and coercive control that results in a person feeling victimized, but that's still not enough.
Everybody's recognizing this. Like, I'm feeling like, yeah, we're going to go through these points, but honestly, do I need to tell you? Interactions with family overseen. She decides that he should call his brother or daughters or not. He has to use her phone, which means he has no privacy, right? She's always there. The one brother testified he went and saw Torres at work. I mean, he didn't want to be around Sarah. So she was in there like a dirty shirt. She wrote letters, a big letter to his whole family about George's behavior, trying to get them in on controlling. She vilifies the family. During the body cam video at the scene, one of the red flags I noticed right away is this bizarre, insistence. Oh, he chose his family over me, which is so common among abusers who are sort of reversing that victim offender role, right? I'm the savior. She decided what activities he would do. So she oversaw and controlled his communications, his connections with family and friends. She ran around the complex giving everybody her narrative so that people would take her side, not his, right? She even the night of the incident was yelling so much when he's trying to talk to his brother on the phone that he has to get off the phone with his brother. And little did his brother know that would be the last time he ever spoke with his brother. And, oh yeah, financial. It's her debit card. It's her money. It's her car. It's her everything. She controlled absolutely everything. So it all fits. So yes, there was coercive control in this case by Sarah over Mr. Torres.
That person then has to feel like they can't escape from that. They've either been told, if you leave me, you're going to die, or a family member is going to be harmed, your children, your mother, whatever it might be. And as a result of that, they develop strategies to cope with that, acquiescing, pleasing, doing anything they're asked to do, demeaning themselves, allowing themselves to be controlled. All of the things that would fend off, if you will, some abuse or attack or threat to them or someone who surrounds them. So those would be the components that you would need to have, and that dance continues to go on usually repeatedly throughout the course of that relationship.
So I think what you're describing is, in a sense, a subjective nature to the syndrome that's being described.
It's both objective and subjective. So objective in terms of the facts, like what's really happening, a person's being.
That was sneaky on the part of that defense lawyer. The defense lawyer asked, oh, but you're describing something subjective. And the reason that is important is because elements of the law require objective assessments, right? So this witness just did great by, once again, telling the truth. He says, well, yeah, subjective and objective. So I think this witness is doing great in terms of education. So far, I haven't seen anything in his testimony or his demeanor or anything else that I find objectionable, that I know to be incorrect. It all lines up.
Abused, they're being told certain things, there's control over them. But then the subjective part is the person's interpretation of that, their perception of that. So there's really both going on, and they have to kind of work together in order for this syndrome to be formalized and properly diagnosed.
You indicated that there sometimes may be some defense mechanisms that are, or strategies that are devised by the battered individual, the abused individual.
Yes, sir.
In your experience and your training, do controlled substances, alcohol, drugs, frequently appear in your analysis or assessment?
Yes, and the way they appear is they can appear either from the abuser or the abused or both. What can happen from the abuser standpoint is they may only be abusive, or the abuse may become worse if they abuse substances. From the abused standpoint, it may be self-medication. It may be a way of coping with the anxiety that there's going to be something bad that potentially could happen to them or somebody else. It's kind of a way of dealing with walking on the eggshells. So if I use substances, that can deaden the pain, if you will, for me, or help me to forget about it. So it's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes part of either the abuser's behavior or the abused behavior.
Or both. And I just want to point out that both of these individuals, just based on the evidence of the case as a whole, both individuals used substances before they got together. So did the relationship, the toxic relationship dynamics contribute to that substance abuse? Perhaps the dynamics of having, say, a drinking buddy could also contribute. There isn't just sort of one factor. Alcohol is a disinhibitor. And as for deadening the pain and walking on eggshells, it would make somebody feel more at ease. But all of this was present with Sarah Boone prior to her meeting Mr. Torres. So she didn't drink because of what he did, or she didn't develop a drinking problem because of what he did.
Do they, in your experience, do they, on occasion, actually defend the individual that is abusing them?
That's a very frequent part of this syndrome. Not always, but it's very frequent. It's why interviewing them becomes difficult sometimes, because they're used to explaining away their behavior, the abuser's behavior, my black eye, my missing tooth, his screaming and yelling in the background while I'm talking to mom on the phone. So they're used to making excuses for it.
That's hilarious. So what he's saying is true. We all know that. We can all, Sarah is trying to get this applied to herself and trying to convince the jury. But we also know that Mr. Torres wouldn't tell on her when he was questioned, except the one time when it finally came out that he was acting in self-defense. But I'm laughing because the example that this doctor gives, not having heard the testimony in the trial, right? The example he gives is somebody, the abuser, yelling while you're on the phone trying to talk to your mom or whatever, and so you have to get off the phone. Well, that's what Sarah did. So that is priceless. And this doctor has no clue that's what he's done. He's just using a common example.
It's part of the coping strategy, trying to explain away this behavior. He's had a bad day. She's, really upset about something else that's going on. She's really never like this at any other time. So defending that person is oftentimes a part of the battered spouse syndrome, and getting the person who's been abused to get them to stop defending them so they can talk about the actual abuse becomes a challenge.
Now, the DSM makes reference on occasion to rule-outs, I assume for the diagnosis that's being applied. What is a rule-out?
A rule-out in our parlance says that we should consider these things before we look at other diagnoses. So, for instance, if we're going to consider schizophrenia, we should rule out substance abuse first, because oftentimes some drugs can create hallucinations and delusions and psychotic symptoms. So there's always rule outs, just like there are for medical conditions. So look for this before you consider this, is really what a rule out is.
Are there specific rule outs for battered women syndrome or PTSD?
Sure. So there's rule outs for everything because you're considering a number of different conditions before you make a differential diagnosis, or you pick that's the one that I think best fits this person. So yes, there's rule outs for both of those.
For my sake, what is a differential diagnosis?
That's how you decide which one. It's whether it's your medical doctor, your psychologist, whoever. It's how they pick the right diagnosis. So you're going through kind of a card catalog in your head, and you're saying, all right, there's symptoms of this, but that's also consistent with symptoms of that. So is it schizophrenia? Is it bipolar disorder? Now I have to ask more questions. It's a decision tree. And that decision tree helps you to inform the person and either make a diagnosis in a legal setting or help to treat them clinically.
Now, if the individual, the psychologist who's doing the evaluation, identifies the presence of certain rule outs, what is their response professionally to those rule outs in establishing or assessing the patient?
You have to go down a decision tree. And we all kind of do decision trees in our mind every day about what we should do or shouldn't do in certain situations. It happens automatically. It's more structured when you're doing it professionally. So if you have a concern about substances, then you would kind of take that track and you'd have to ask a lot of questions in that area. So you'd want to know what kind of substances, how often are they using those substances, what kind of effect have those substances had on them before. I just picked one of many possible rule outs there. But every one of them you'd have to explore or ask additional questions because, of course, you don't want to come up with a wrong diagnosis because in a legal setting, that leads you to a bad opinion. In a clinical setting, it leads to bad treatment.
Now, I want to go back just a second. We talked about the subjective nature of the abused individual's.
Oh, this is Beck doing this. He's again using the word subjective nature. That is for the benefit of the jury and for the record because he knows that there is case law that says objective. I think this matters, and it's just a sneaky little way to keep sliding in subjective.
Understanding of what's happening, does this subjective or does the experience that they have suffered result in, on occasion, their experiencing or their anticipating or assuming or imagining a threat that others may not?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
They're going to approach because we're back to subjective and objective, and I bet you they're going to argue about that at sidebar with the judge because Mr. J is on to what Beck is doing. It is true that a person who has suffered this will perceive the possibility of a threat differently, especially in that particular relationship. So, yes, it can change your perception. I don't know how far down the road they can go with this. We'll have to see. So people are asking about rebuttal and all of that. Yeah, the prosecution is going to use all this. So far, I don't think that this is helping the defense as much as you might think.
Objection is sustained.
Doctor, from what you've described this morning, I think we're talking about a complex and sophisticated process for assessing and diagnosing PTSD, battered women, the matters that you described. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
And in this instance, this particular matter regarding the state versus Sarah Boone, were you approached about the possibility of doing an assessment as to Sarah Boone?
Approach.
So the objection is on relevance. I wonder what the defense was trying to pull there. I wonder if he refused to do it for the defense. Someone asked for subtitles. It's not available on this feed. I don't know if you try and turn them on your end, if that will make a difference. I think he was smiling at the jury, not smirking.
Doctor, when you are retained to do an evaluation in these matters, what is your practice in regards to the assessment proceedings, the assessment efforts?
Well, I'd first want to know what type of an assessment that it is, because there's different methods of approach that you'd use to analyze and be able to give an opinion on whatever question's being asked of you. So the very first goal for me as a forensic psychologist is to isolate what the question is. So what are they asking me to do? Because I want to know, A, can I do that? Am I qualified to do that, or should I refer that to somebody else? Or B, is that something I'm going to have enough time to do and enough resources to do? And the next thing I would do is start asking questions about specifically what you already have or what can you get to help me answer this question. So right away I'd start to find out what's available. As forensic psychologists, we're supposed to do comprehensive evaluations of whatever the legal issue or question is, and it's supposed to rely on multiple sources of information. So depending again upon the question, I'm trying to then define early on what are those multiple pieces of information I'm going to need to help to try to give an opinion and an educated opinion about that matter.
Have you done an assessment in this particular case?
No, sir.
Can you tell us?
Wonderful. He has not done an assessment in this particular case.
Very briefly, whether that was your decision?
Objection, relevance.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Move on.
Objection sustained.
In your experience, doctor,
Thank you very much.
can battered women syndrome rear its ugly head? For instance, when there are threats to other members of the family, two-legged or four?
So, yes, sir, it's very common that it's not just the person. It increases the terror from someone who's doing the abuse to mention other family members that they might also suffer abuse. So whether it's emotional or physical, those type of things are very common. Not always, but it's very common in the course of domestic violence cases or intimate partner violence cases.
What he's saying is correct, but y'all know where the defense is trying to go with this. And the allegation, this new allegation about the victim treating the dogs in a particular manner is just more of her nonsense. There is absolutely nothing backing it up. I said yesterday, show me the veterinary bills, because she loves her dogs so much that she didn't feed them. But anyway, show me the receipts. And there are none, just her narrative.
And that fear that's developed by the abused individual may exist contemporaneously with other issues, alcoholism, schizophrenia, and the like. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. They can all be combined together, and certainly that increases if there's other family members that are threatened or live in the same home or close by. That can increase the terror, and the purpose of that is to increase control, to make sure the abuser has more control over the person who's being abused.
1 second, Your Honor. May I?
Yes, sir.
Someone one time, I was dating somebody, and he suggested that maybe I should get rid of my dog because he's not a fan of dogs. And my response was, bye. And he couldn't believe it. And that was it. That was the end of the relationship, right? She had ways to keep him out of the house. She had him there and not there whenever she wanted. But she drove her child to his parents' house to pick him up. She pursued him. If she was so concerned and worried, she would have locked the door and called the cops. This is such nonsense.
Look at outside materials. In doing an assessment, doctor, do you look at outside materials?
Yes, sir, always.
And what kind of outside materials do you necessarily review in order to make this assessment?
Specifically to battered woman syndrome?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So specific to this, you'd want to look at a lot of different sources of information because you're trying to, A, make a diagnosis if there's a trauma-related disorder, but you're also trying to figure out if there's the other elements necessary to make the diagnosis as well, like abuse that's been chronic over a period of time, and that the person feels they can't leave that situation, and if other people have been threatened. So you'd want to know things like not only what the facts are of the particular incident, usually some crime that's been committed, but you'd want to know the history of those behaviors. Has anyone else seen those? Are there people you can talk to? You know, friends, neighbors, bosses, anybody who's seen or heard of this abuse before.
Or how about ex-spouses who were abused, right? Like Brian, you know they're going to bring this up. You know the state is holding back that police interview with him where he admits she got her claws out and went after him.
Have there been medical visits where the person has actually been damaged and shown up, made some other excuse, they slipped or fell or whatever it might be? You'd want to do psychological testing as a forensic psychologist because we have very good tests that help us to determine whether someone's suffering from a trauma-based disorder or not. You'd want to know if the person who'd been accused of the crime for this type of evaluation made any statements to the police. If they did, you'd want to hear that statement. Or has there been a 911 call or calls? If that's happened, you'd want to hear that too. So any evidence you could collect, and these are some of those questions I was talking to you about before, you'd want to ask the person who's trying to hire you in the beginning, well, tell me what you have, because you'd want to see whether or not you're going to be able to make this analysis or not. So it's not good enough just to talk to the person, because that's just one form of information. It's almost like being a behavioral detective, if you will, as a forensic psychologist, because we're trying to get as much evidence wrapping around our interview with the person as possible to be able to guide our questions, but inform us and see whether there's what we call convergent validity. It's a fancy way of saying, does everything agree with each other? Does everything connect in a way that it all sort of makes sense? Or are these strange conflicting pieces of evidence that we need to explain away, or it just doesn't fit the criteria?
This is freaking awesome. I love this witness. He is exactly right. And this is what I used to do. You go get all the corollary information, and does it hang together, right? And when he says this, I mean, the jury has got to be thinking about her testimony versus what they saw on body cam and what they saw in her interrogation. They have got to be thinking about that. Does this hang together or not? This witness is telling the truth, and he's saying, hey, the person's word is not good enough. This is flipping gold for the prosecution, even though this is a defense witness. I love it. I just love it. And I've had offenders tell me, put on the big act. They're real smooth and charming, and they lie so well, way better than Sarah. And how they're wonderful and blah, blah, blah. But then when you go look at the other evidence, they're full of crap. I love it. He's great.
So it's a rather comprehensive and complex evaluation has to be conducted to come up with this. And the final piece I'd say about it is that because oftentimes the abused person is defending still the person that they've oftentimes committed a crime against, it takes a bit of time to get to where you need to go. With all victims of trauma, whether you're talking about situations where you're doing therapy or you're doing an analysis in this type of setting, a criminal setting, it usually takes some time to break through that and get them to trust you to talk about the trauma, but to stop defending the person and talk about the abuse and how they felt about the abuse.
So the defense is going to use what he's saying here to explain why Sarah lied to police at first and why Sarah lied about previous incidents and injuries. The issue, though, becomes, well, wait a minute. It's not like she hadn't got to the point of a breakthrough yet and wasn't telling anybody, because she was telling everybody, anybody who would listen, including the police. So, it's not like she defended and covered up and minimized all along, and then finally maybe got into therapy or finally realized that she needs to disclose. No. She claims things when she wants to, when it benefits her, and she lies about things when it benefits her. And, so this, as much as it sounds like it fits, it actually doesn't. But you bet the defense is going to try and use this.
Your goal, if you will, is to be able to see what's happening in that situation through the abused person's eyes. If you look at it through your eyes, often it doesn't seem to make sense. But if you look at it through their eyes, if it meets the criteria for a battered spouse, then you can better understand their world and what they're dealing with.
And real briefly, some of the things that you are evaluating when you examine, particularly the individual themselves, you're looking for anxiety and or fear.
Yes.
Low self-esteem.
Yes.
Are you looking for depression?
Yes.
Are you looking for any form of social or interpersonal withdrawal?
Withdrawal, especially if it's forced withdrawal, controlled withdrawal, if there's consequences to socializing with my family, my friends, calling them on the phone, texting them. So especially in that context.
So all that fits Mr. Torres, not her.
Stockholm syndrome.
Sure, that can be part of it.
And what is Stockholm syndrome, real briefly?
So it's really adapting to someone who's captive or taking over a person, controlling their life, sort of adapting to that situation. The famous model of that would be many, many decades ago, a woman called Patty Hearst, who was kidnapped. But it's taking on the beliefs and taking on an acceptance, if you will, of a kind of a captive situation. And in these situations with women who have been abused, who meet the criteria for battered spouse syndrome, they oftentimes adapt, defend, and take on in an acquiescent way that this is okay and I'm part of this situation as opposed to opposed to the situation.
Will this syndrome exhibit itself in physical attributes?
It can, at times, even physical illness at times.
Inability to sleep, inability to keep food down, and those type of things.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Would that individual potentially experience hypervigilance?
Well, that's a large part of it. Of any trauma-based disorder is hypervigilance. What changes when you've been traumatized, any kind of trauma, not just abuse, but what changes is your perception of danger. So whether it's the lid of the garbage can hitting you on your nose, or whether it's someone being abusive towards you, those situations change your perception of danger. So you no longer see that object or that person in the same way. You have a foreboding sense of danger could occur. So other people may not perceive it with that person. He's so nice at work, or he's nice in these other settings, or he's so great on the softball field, but at home he's different. So that person who's being abused, their perception changes.
Does that include denial?
It could include denial, and oftentimes that's part of the explanation. The defensiveness of that person is the denial of how bad things are that are going on.
Thank you, Doctor.
Any cross-examination?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
Nice to see you in person.
Good to see you again.
So there's a subjective component to trauma, is what I understand you're saying, correct?
Always. Yes, sir.
And so hypothetically, a couple could be in a 3.5-year relationship with physical violence, emotional violence, even sexual violence, but either or both of those partners may or may not believe that is a traumatic experience for him or herself, correct?
Yes, sir. People mistake the stimulus about what happens as the trauma. The trauma is really the reaction to it. So bad things that happen, people don't always react in the same way to them. So yes, sir, that's correct.
So for instance, a homicide detective or a homicide prosecutor may go out to a scene and see a freshly dead body, and their perception of that environmental stimulus may be very different from somebody who works at Dunkin' Donuts and just gives us muffins in the morning coming across a dead body. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. That homicide detective may be able to go eat lunch right after it, and the other person who works at the donut restaurant may not be able to eat for a couple of days as a result. So, yes, perception is a big part of how trauma occurs.
And I understand your answers today, and I'm not saying that they were different the other day. But I understand you to say that it's very important to do a comprehensive evaluation to get the full picture of what is going on in the perceived battered spouse's mind, correct?
Yes.
What's the problem, defense? You're the ones who brought that up. I'm going to fast forward past the approach. Somebody told me my mic is too loud. Let me know if that's the case. Whoops.
Ruled.
So the defense objected and the judge overruled it. So the state can go ahead.
So we've been talking about the importance of doing a comprehensive evaluation with as many collateral sources as one could possibly have when making an assessment about the battered spouse syndrome, correct?
Yes, sir. Relevant piece of information. Yes, sir.
And would you agree that obviously the person who is accused of committing a crime, there are credibility issues that you do need to care for when relying upon that person's history provided about the events leading to that and the past events describing the relationship with the intimate partner?
Yes, sir. In every forensic evaluation, that's the case.
Is this particularly important if there's a comorbidity with an alcohol abuse disorder?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what alcohol abuse disorder means in the DSM-5 TR?
Sure. It's the biggest part of it is it's not just the use of alcohol, it's impairment that happens as a result. So it's the excessive use of alcohol, but that could mean something different, just like the excessive use of marijuana might mean. But it's the use of alcohol to the degree that it impairs or infects a person's life. And with that may come a lot of other things like deceitfulness or aggression or unreliability, sleep or somatic problems, difficulties. So, but the important thing to remember there is that it's the use of a substance that impairs or affects a person's life.
And if there is alcohol involved in the histories being given about either the event in question or any preceding events, must the evaluator take that into account when evaluating the memories and perceptions of the person giving them that history?
Yes, so in introducing that new topic about memory, we know that substances can interfere and impair memory. So as a result of that, you want to know what they were using, how close it was. If you're talking about a particular event, like a crime, you'd want to know if there was substance usage, and if so, what the person's memory functioning was, and does that match up with other sources of information about what those events were.
Are you?
I love it. I love it. This witness, you would think he was for the prosecution right here. I love this expert. He's telling the truth. And Mr. J is very quietly letting the jury know she's lying. Be careful. Don't get gaslit.
you familiar with the narcissistic personality disorder?
Yes, sir, of course.
Is that something recognized in the DSM-5 TR?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell us whether or not if a person who is giving a history, whether it's the patient/client or whatnot, has traits, perhaps not a diagnosis, but even just traits of the narcissistic personality disorder, is that something the evaluator should account for in evaluating the credibility of the history given?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because all forms of disorders or conditions or just traits may lead to inaccurate information, either not purposely or purposely. They may be deceptive. So certain personality disorders or traits can lead to deception or inappropriate or inaccurate information. That's why you need more than one source of information. Does what this person's saying to me check out with other sources of information?
And I don't mean to quiz you on it, but can you tell us some of the criteria for the narcissistic personality disorder?
I can, yes, sir. So it
Oh my gosh, this is flippin' gold, especially considering this witness is the defense witness. Boy, oh boy, the jury is being educated and warned at the same time, and Mr. J doesn't have to seem aggressive at all. He doesn't have to go after Sarah directly. It's beautiful.
is a grandiose sense of self-worth. It's the consideration of yourself over anybody else. It's kind of operating in your own world, so it's an inflated sense of who you are. It's a misperception of how important you are to other people and your meaning to other people. It's a sense of specialness, that you stand out from other people in terms of special skill or skills, and that other people, if they don't recognize that, they should recognize that. So the biggest heading there is an inflated sense of self-esteem and grandiosity.
Are you familiar with an adjustment disorder diagnosis?
Yes, sir.
And is that in the DSM-5 TR?
Yes, sir, correct.
Can you tell us about that?
Adjustment disorder is a person's reaction, and it could be emotional, it can be behavioral, or it can be both, to a situation that occurs. You broke up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, so you're upset about that. And so as a result, you're tearful, you're anxious or nervous or worried about what may happen to you as a result of breaking up with them, or you behaviorally may start not going to work, or get into more arguments or fights with your children as a result. So it's a temporary reaction to a stressful situation that occurs in some individuals.
And hypothetically, if a person who is giving a history for criteria of diagnosis, let me strike that. If somebody is giving a history and that is being used to come to an evaluation conclusion of battered spouse syndrome, if that person has been diagnosed with adjustment disorder predating the traumatic relationship, is that something the evaluator should take into account?
You'd want to know any prior diagnosis, because it may not necessarily be exclusionary, but it could. So adjustment disorder is a temporary reaction. You're upset in a temporary period, and most of them just go away on their own. Whereas something else like a traumatic stress disorder is long-term. It's something that a person's stuck with for a period of time that usually doesn't just go away on its own. So yes, you'd want to know that for that term I used before, that differential diagnosis. You'd want to know those things to compare and contrast them and hold them up against each other.
Now, hypothetically, if somebody says things like, I'm the best thing that has ever happened to you, and I'm the best you'll ever do, are those indications of the narcissistic personality disorder?
Well, they could be. You wouldn't want just that alone. You'd want to see if that was happening in other settings. Is that happening on the job, with friends, with family members? Is it showing up on psychological testing? But certainly that would be a red flag. You'd go, I want to pay more attention to that. I want to investigate that further.
And is it important when evaluating trauma-based disorders, because they're based on emotional reactions, to do that rule out on alcohol or drug use?
Certainly you'd want to do that. It's not usually disguised as a trauma-based disorder. Alcohol and trauma aren't usually rule-outs for each other, but it could exacerbate a condition. It could make you diagnose a trauma condition when it's just an adjustment disorder. I say just, I don't mean to minimize it, but
I really like that he said that. They're two different things, and one isn't necessarily caused by the other and doesn't rule out the other.
it's not as serious as a trauma-based disorder.
Is it important to consider whether the abuser and or the abused behave differently in the absence of alcohol or drugs?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because you're trying to analyze a psychological condition. If, as a result of drug or alcohol abuse, their behavior changes or their perceptions change, that's not a psychological condition, that's a substance abuse disorder. So that's why you'd want to know that. So if their condition remains the same, maybe it's a little worse when they're using drugs or alcohol, but it's the same perception of threat or danger, then you're going to diagnose a trauma-based disorder. If not, then you're going to diagnose a substance abuse disorder. You can have both, but you'd want to rule one out as opposed to the other.
And are you familiar with the classic three-step cycle of battered spouse syndrome or domestic violence?
Yes, sir, I am.
Can you explain that to the jury?
Sure. So there's a cycle of violence that was first developed by a woman in the 70s called Lenore Walker, Dr. Lenore Walker. She's a psychologist who's usually credited with developing the whole theory of battered spouse syndrome. And in the classic model, which we know oftentimes happens, not every time, but in the classic model, there's a period of tension buildup where things are happening, little arguments are happening, there's bickering back and forth, there may be some threats or some loud voices back and forth, but it's all things that are leading up to a possible violent episode. Then there's the episode that happens itself, the violent episode. It could be verbal, sexual, physical, but there's the violent incident that occurs. And then after that violent episode occurs, there's a honeymoon phase where the person who's done the abuse, they're apologizing, taking that person who was abused out to dinner, buying them things, saying nice things to them, complimenting them to sort of make up for the abuse. And it's it's called the cycle of violence. And the reason why is it tends to repeat itself in a lot of these situations of battered spouse syndrome where you see this repeating itself over and over and over again. So people are kind of stuck in these revolving doors in their relationship.
And can one cycle be enough to traumatize a person?
Yes.
Does this trauma necessarily have to be coming from a man to a woman?
No.
And in fact, as times have changed, language has changed, and so when we keep referring to it as battered woman syndrome in the courtroom today, what we're actually talking about now is battered spouse syndrome or even intimate partner violence.
Yes, sir. I mean, interpartner violence can happen outside of legal settings, but it's really a kind of the large overgrouping, if you will, to be able to talk about all of these other things that can happen as a result, like trauma-based disorders and battered spouse syndrome. And you're right. The later research has kind of pulled us away from thinking this only happens to women in heterosexual relationships. We know now there's all sorts of derivations, and that men can suffer also from battered spouse syndrome, battered person syndrome, homosexual couples. So we know it goes around to everybody, but still, women are more often diagnosed with battered spouse syndrome than anybody else.
Does the trauma have to come in the form of physical violence?
No, sir.
Does it have to come in the form of sexual violence?
No, sir.
Can it come in the form of emotional or mental violence?
Yes, sir.
And would examples of that include such as running the partner down and telling them that they're no good and, just general insulting and lowering their value?
It could. Remember, that's the stimulus, so it would depend on how the person who's receiving that responds to it as to whether or not it becomes traumatic. But yes, sir, that would be the first red flag you'd want to investigate.
And you mentioned isolation before. So if somebody in a hypothetical intimate partner setting is trying to isolate the partner from his or her family members or friends or coworkers, can that be, and I'm not saying necessarily, can that be indications of intimate partner violence that could lead to battered spouse syndrome?
So sure, that would be an example of coercive control. So if a person was doing that, that's consistent with that classification of battered person syndrome. Yes.
And hypothetically, controlling another person, the intimate partner's personal property or effects, such as a birth certificate or identification papers, can that be indication of emotional trauma towards the partner who is lacking the control over those identification papers?
So that's a stimulus that could result, depending on how the person subjectively perceives it, in some trauma. So yes, all of the things that you mentioned could be stimulus, if you will, that a person could perceive as traumatic.
It's interesting to me that the prosecution used that specific example. It makes me wonder if we are going to hear later about Sarah hanging on to his identification, because I do think that did happen once. There was an allegation of that. So I'm wondering if the prosecution's going to bring that up. I think the defense will try and use this the other way and say, oh, George took her car keys and her debit card. So they're going to try and spin that in that way. Very interesting, though, the prosecution's asking this particular question using this example.
And hypothetically, if one partner A gives partner B a gift, such as a bicycle, but partner A continues to maintain that the bicycle is his or hers because he or she bought it, even though it was a gift to B, can that be a form of emotional abuse towards B?
Sure, it sounds like control, but I guess you could interpret it as emotional abuse too. But it sounds more like a control mechanism that'd be consistent.
I'm not suggesting that it's legally or morally okay, but when one intimate partner does these hypothetical emotional things, non-physical violent things to partner B, if partner B has poor personal skills and coping skills and may be consuming alcohol, is it unreasonable or unfathomable to hear that partner B responded with physical violence to partner B?
Objection, assuming facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Any approach?
Yes.
Yeah, it was too close to real life. He did say it was a hypothetical, so I don't know.
So let me respond to that.
Oh, so it's overruled.
Please go ahead.
So it would increase the probability of physical violence. So if those things, in fact, were perceived as threatening or abusive in any way or insulting to the person who they were directed towards, it would increase the probability of physical violence.
And then again, the perceptions are all in the eye of the beholder, whether emotional things that are said to one another or physical things are done to one another, whether the recipient of that behavior views it as trauma is a subjective decision by that person, right?
Yes, the perception is the impact. So that's how you would know that. It's just, water off a duck's back, or is it something that kind of sticks with me and I think about it all the time?
Now, you mentioned earlier anxiety, low self-esteem, and depression can all be components of battered spouse syndrome, correct?
Correct.
Is it important as the evaluator to rule out whether or not these conditions predated the violent or abusive relationship?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because where things start is important diagnostically. So if all of those things were in place, all of the symptoms that were just mentioned are in place, then you wouldn't attribute those to the abuse. You'd say those things were pre-existing. Now, abuse could make it worse, but in terms of your diagnosis, you need to know where things started. So if those symptoms didn't start at the time where there was abuse that was alleged to have occurred, then it's unlikely that it's attributed to that abuse.
And independent of any narcissistic personality disorder traits, would you agree that anybody in a certain legal setting has a motivation to present themselves in a certain way?
Yes, to do impression management, either depending on the outcome. So if there's punitive sanctions, they may lie to make themselves look worse, or as a result, if they're in other settings, like divorce settings, they may lie to make themselves look better. So there's always some impression management you have to kind of look through in your evaluation.
And that's important for an evaluator?
It should be looked at in every evaluation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any redirect examination?
Just want to, one more time, in response to the state's questioning, you indicated that where an individual's credibility may be in question, there is a necessity that the individual who's making the assessment corroborate whatever they're being told. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, in a number of different ways. We have psychological tests that assess for things called malingering or faking mental health problems or difficulties. So you'd want to do that. You'd want to look at other evidence to see if it's all consistent. So it's very important you don't just rely on self-report.
Is it possible that an individual...
That's hilarious. The defense's own witness, under defense questioning, says it's very important you don't rely just on self-reports. Love it.
may exhibit one or two attributes of a particular DSM diagnosis, but not actually qualify because it's simply not there.
Right, sure. So sometimes, like, social isolation can be because we're introverted, or it could be part of depression. So you need to kind of follow it out and see how many of the symptoms are there to see whether or not it meets the criteria.
So I may exhibit one or two symptoms of narcissism, but not qualify because I don't meet all of those, or a significant number of the indicators that you would rely upon to make that diagnosis.
Yes, or it can be situationally based, like we may display narcissistic features here in a courtroom, but may not do that in any other part of our life.
Now, in your experience, have you determined, learned, either through your studies, experience, and so on, whether or not the abusive behavior may begin based upon an individual's perception of things occurring to him as a child or her as a child? In other words, if they grow up in an abusive household.
Okay, I understand.
Sustained.
Wow. Did you catch that? So Mr. J objected, so they're not going there. But Sarah, in one of her letters, claimed that she suffered abuse all her life. And so what? Now she was just going to throw her whole family, her dead parents, under the bus now? To claim this is why she has the subjective beliefs that she does. And once again, with no evidence, again, everybody else is evil except for her.
You've indicated that there are things that, I think in response to the state's cross-examination, that there are things that may add to or may contribute to a particular psychosis or symptom. Would an individual's background as a child include those type of criteria?
Yes, sir. You're more vulnerable to certain psychological conditions based on your history. So if you've been traumatized before, or bad situations have happened to you before, if you've suffered from depression before, it makes you more vulnerable to those conditions or other conditions later on.
Finally, one question or one symptom that we haven't discussed, I don't think, or maybe it was discussed by the state, was learned helplessness. What is that?
Learned helplessness, I've really spoken about it a little bit, but now we have the fancy term for it. Learned helplessness was really researched by someone named Seligson, a doctor named Seligson, psychologist, research psychologist. And just real briefly, what it is, it's when someone kind of gives up and feels like there's nothing that they can do to change their situation. It was originally done with laboratory animals. But where a person really feels that no matter what strategy they've taken, like leave, stay, fight, whatever it might be, it won't work. It usually.
So the defense is going to try and claim that Sarah, suffered long, and that she suffered from learned helplessness, and that's why she didn't leave. And, this is who she is. She's this victim, learned helplessness. Think about that. Okay. So to describe what learned helplessness is, the easy thing to think of is, where in the old days you go to a circus or something and see elephants walking around in a circle. They're all chained, walking around in the circle. If you take the chains off the elephants, they'll keep walking in the circle. They think there's no escape, so there's no point in fighting. But Sarah, even in her letters, she's going to fight till the very end. Always believing she's tried everything, but she's going to fight. That's who she is. There's no indication in her behavior, then or now, of any learned helplessness. So this is hilarious.
It leads to depression or developments of other strategies, like I have to appease or please or make sure I do everything correctly or apologize. So it's really believing that no matter what you do, it won't be effective.
Doctor, thank you. testimony. Thank you for
Sir.
traveling up here from Miami so early in the morning.
No problem at all.
Thanks for the rest.
Thank you, sir. You can be excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Can the parties approach for a moment?
Tracy's asking if any of the letters will come in. I don't know. They have to, there are rules about what can
Take that
come in.
mid-morning break.
Oh.
Similar instruction I've given you over the last couple of days. I'm sure you're tired of hearing it, but I got to get things or chart 15.
I just want to see if they're going to argue anything during break.
Only 15 minutes. Thank you.
No. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit to see how far we are. Oh, yeah, we can get caught up now. So there are rules about when and what and how the prosecution can come back with things. So
2020 CF 2603, State of Florida versus Sarah Boone. State.
David Sharp, half the state. Boone, J. the state.
Defense.
James Owens for Sarah Boone.
Tony Henderson for Sarah Boone. Kevin Beck on behalf of Sarah Boone.
All right, Ms. Boone is still seated at counsel's table. Yes, Mr. Owens.
Judge, we had several late witnesses that were scheduled. Where's that for this? We've excused Detective Scott Lowen based on the testimony of Detective Cossel. We've excused Abraham Marino, who was going to be.
are you hearing this? I'm not sure if you can hear. Owens is saying that the defense has excused Detective Scott Lowen based on the testimony of Detective Copsel. Oh, somebody's saying in the chat, I excel at everything I do. No, I don't. Far from it. And you guys know it. You're playing with me. They're also excusing from the defense side, Mr. Marino.
Recall, based on the testimony of Detective Copsel. You've heard from the two deputies, you've heard from Dr. Brandon. Maria Gallipoli is a young lady that's outside. She was a witness as a neighbor in that complex, and she would testify about observing physical injuries to Sarah Boone. We've spoken with her over the break that, in our opinions collectively, Tony Henderson and myself, that it's not necessary to call Ms. Gallipoli because we have other evidence of injuries.
Well, this is interesting. So the defense has a witness sitting right outside, ready to go to testify that that she's seen injuries on Ms. Boone. But the defense lawyers have discussed it and they think it's not a good idea to put her on the stand. And so one has to wonder why not. Perhaps the defense knows that maybe the prosecution can score some points and they got in what they wanted to get in, so maybe it's better to let it go. So that's funny.
There was disagreement about that, but I believe that Ms. Boone is now in agreement that we're not going to call Ms. Gallipoli. So that leaves now calling the Orange County Sheriff's Department phone extraction expert.
Ms. Uwadden.
Yes, back to the stand, and we've got two short videos. These are the short videos relating to George Torres with a bat and then striking the TV. They're less than a minute apiece. The problem with that is because we've excused so many witnesses, that's our last witness. So we're going to be done here in probably 11:15, and then...
But Ms. Walker is supposed to be here at 1 o'clock?
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
And then I haven't had a chance to meet with Dr. Harper, but I'm going to meet with her at lunch
Mhm.
over next door. And we anticipate Dr. Harper this afternoon. And then we may be really close to ending the defense's case.
Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know that.
But we're going to have a gap here.
Okay, so
early lunch,
well, yeah,
long lunch.
that may, well, if you're saying that your presentation with Ms. Wadden is 15 minutes, I don't know what the cross is going to be. It may be de minimis, or you may be saving her for rebuttal. I don't know. Mr. J or Mr. Cacciatore?
I'm sorry.
As it relates to Ms. Wadden, CSI Tech, you're not calling her in
She already
rebuttal?
made the predicate during her trial testimony during our case in chief for the exhibit. I'm going to put her in rebuttal.
Okay, awesome. So what we can do is we can proceed with Ms. Wadden, and we could just take an early lunch and ask them to be back here maybe 12:50. So that way, if we have any issues, we can address them before we start at 1 o'clock. Ms. Boone, you were sworn this morning. I just got a couple of things to go over with you. There was a list of witnesses that was provided to the court last night and again this morning as potential witnesses that may be called in your defense. One of those witnesses was Maria Gallipoli. Your lawyers have advised that they may not be calling that person as a witness in this case. Do you understand that?
I do.
And again, similar to other conversations we've had, I don't want to go into any specifics of any conversations that you've had with any of your lawyers, just whether or not you've had them. Have you had conversations with your lawyers about calling Miss Gallipoli as a witness?
Yes.
Have you had conversations with your attorneys about why they are deciding not to call her as a witness?
Yes.
And similar to what we discussed yesterday, do you understand that your attorneys make the trial strategy decisions, including what witnesses to call or not to call?
Yes.
Okay. Are you still satisfied with their representation of you in this matter?
Yes.
And are you still on board with the strategy that has been employed in your defense?
Yes.
Are you in agreement with the strategy not to call Ms. Gallipoli as a witness in this case?
I am.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, ma'am. Then let's go ahead and bring our jury back in, and we can call Ms. Uwad and go from there.
Mr.
All right.
Lane, can you excuse Ms. Gallipoli?
All right. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and stand and bring back in our panel. What I have. Oh, it's 2 rounds.
I'm so happy the defense called that witness.
Defense, do you recognize our jury?
Yes, sir.
I think you all can be seated. Members of the jury, once seated again, if you could confirm that you complied with the court's instructions during our break by raising your hands. Record reflect all hands have been raised. Defense, you may call your next witness.
Judge, we would call forensic phone extraction officer with the Orange County Sheriff's Department, Officer Wadden, to the stand.
Thank you. We'll bring her in.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
Good morning, ma'am. Could you state and spell your name for the record for us?
First name is Janella, Junella. Last name Wadden, UAD as in Delta, AN.
Counselor, you may inquire.
Ms. White, again, your official title,
Digital Forensics Examiner.
and are you referred to as a detective, or what is your?
Just an examiner.
Ma'am, Judge, can I approach the witness?
Yes, of course.
Ma'am, I'm going to show you what has been marked as identification defense exhibit AA. And you recognize that video or that CD of the video?
Yes.
Well, I think we kind of prepped you on it ahead of time. That was extracted from the Sarah Boone phone that you were asked to extract?
Yes, one of the media files, yes.
Okay, and is that video a fair and accurate depiction of one of the videos that was extracted from Sarah Boone's phone?
Yes.
And then identification Z, defense identification, same type question. You've had a chance to review that video, and is that one of the videos that was extracted from the Sarah Boone phone?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, I'd like to have these introduced in evidence.
Any objections?
No objection.
All right, what was pre-marked as AA will be received into evidence without objection as defendant 17. What was pre-marked as Z will be received into evidence without objection as defendants 18.
Judge, we're going to play Exhibit 17 first.
You may proceed.
And is there a volume? Judge, do you have control of the volume?
Volume is on.
Trigger warning, just in case. I don't know if they're showing the suitcase video. I think they might be. If you have kids in the room, you might want to turn the volume down, put some headphones on, or turn us off temporarily and come back. If this is extremely upsetting to you, please, take care of yourself. There's no judgment here. You're not required to watch. You can catch up on what was said about it later. Do what you need to do. Okay, here we go.
You're gonna help me take this shit out. Real shit. You're gonna help me take it out.
Oh, it's not the suitcase video. It's a TV video. And I like how he says, you're going to help me take this out. Didn't she say it was broken and then she pretended that, okay, I'm assuming she pretended. Then she said that Brian came and fixed it. I want to hear if he really fixed it. So to me, I'm thinking this looks like they're bored and George is going to smash this broken TV and the two of them are going to take it out of there, right? Because that ended up being the place where they put their art after that. So is this fun and her participating, or is this him trying to destroy her property to scare her? Because if she's filming and he's trying to intimidate her, I mean, why is he letting her film? She claims he made her film. Well, this doesn't seem like him like losing his mind here, not in control. So already it doesn't look like that.
You're gonna help me take this shit out. As bad as I want to.
And it ends with the still shot. Could that be him posing? Hey, right? Did you hear threat?
Judge, Judge, I'm asking to publish Exhibit 18.
You may proceed.
I have a big old TV in my basement that I can't get out, and I want to do that to that big old TV. So, does this look to you guys like he's out of control and enraged and is losing it on the TV? Is that what that looks like? Right? GC saying he doesn't look mad. People in the chat are saying, is that it? What? He seems tired. Boole ICU points out, you don't hear Sarah being upset. You don't hear sniffling, weeping, gasping, pleading, nothing. It doesn't look like fury at all. I agree. Okay, let's keep going.
We spoke about it earlier.
Say again, sir.
We spoke about it earlier.
Yes, understood.
They're tendering, no problems.
All right, thank you very much. This witness can't be released, correct?
Yes.
State.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, can the parties approach momentarily, please?
This is ridiculous. They're going to, they're going to try and spin this. Or Sarah wants them to spin it. Whoops.
Members of our jury, at this point in time, it's 11:08. I know it's a little bit early, but due to the pacing and how quickly we've been moving through the evidence this morning, and how the defense has teed up their witnesses for this afternoon, we do not have anyone until 1 o'clock. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and take our lunch break at this time. I'm going to give you a similar instruction that I've given you over the last couple of days. Jurors, you must not conduct any investigation on your own. This includes reading newspapers, watching television, or using a computer, cell phone, the internet, any electronic device, or any other means at all to get information related to this case or the people and places involved in this case. This applies whether you are in the courthouse, at home, or anywhere else. You must not visit places mentioned in the trial or use the internet to look at maps or pictures to see any place discussed during the trial. Jurors do not watch local news or read local newspapers. Jurors must not have discussions of any sort with friends, family members, or even your fellow jurors about the case or the people and places involved. So do not let anyone make comments to you or ask questions about the trial. I want to stress again that just as you must not talk about this case face-to-face, you must not talk about this case by using an electronic device. You must not use phones, computers, or other electronic devices to communicate. Do not send or accept any messages related to this case or your jury service. Do not discuss this case or ask for advice by any means at all, including posting information on an internet website, chat room, or blog. With that, members of the jury, I'm going to ask you to return here to 12 Alpha at 12:50, and we'll pick up shortly thereafter. Thank you so much for your service.
I'm watching a lot of your comments in the chat. Things like, I've smashed up things to be able to fit it in the garbage because I didn't want to pay someone to pick it up. I work at a junkyard and we smash things up just for fun. George didn't knock over any of her knickknacks. He was pretty controlled in it. Sarah was far back, the way she was positioned, out of harm's way.
Thank you. State, anything we need to address?
Nothing. Thank you.
Defense?
No, sir.
All right, we'll see you all at 12:50. Thank you very much. Court's in recess.
So I think this fell flat. What do you think the jury is going to say or think about this? Cat Lady thinks the jury's going to rewatch the interrogation video. I hope so. Somebody said Sarah is like a Timu Amber Heard. You guys crack me up. I'm going to switch screens here. The Heart Machine is saying, great morning for the state. I think so. I think so. Matcha says, what was the purpose of the witness being there? Which witness? You mean the digital forensics? Okay, if that's what you mean, it was to verify that video in respect to the television, that did come from her phone. So they have to lay that foundation. They can't just throw up a video. Hi, Angel Baby. Angel Baby, the video was of Mr. Torres breaking the TV. And honestly, everybody, I think a lot of people in chat are agreeing that this didn't look like something done out of rage. There was nothing scary about it. It was more like fun. So not triggering or scary at all. Captain Katie says some folks destroy things before tossing them out. Yeah. Blade is asking, did the last witness answer any relevant questions? Yeah, the last witness was the digital forensics, and the relevant question was, did this come from Sarah's phone? And the answer was yes. That was all he needed her there for. Yes, Lizzie's pointing out that his swings were well controlled. There was no collateral damage. I agree. Somebody was worried about the dogs possibly walking on all that glass on the ground. That's what I get worried about. If I break a glass or something here, I make Watson, we do an emergency down so that she doesn't come and help me, or sniff around, because I worry about that stuff too. Oh, CJ and PA is pointing out no alcohol or fear shakes. Interesting. CB says it fell flat. Oh, William Carl is pointing out if it were on or even plugged in, it would have sparked. Good point. That's not something I even thought of. Good point. Robert thinks the way George was breathing, it looked like he was angry. Interesting so your perception is valid. I perceived it differently. To me, that looked like someone who smokes way too much and is out of shape and tired. Oh, Lizzie said if that video had remained silent, it might have looked different. Yeah. Yeah. So we're all hoping the jury can see. I think the defense witness today did a great deal for the prosecution. I really do. I really liked. And this is an example of why I say, look, don't trash experts. They're not really there to take sides. Or at least that's not how it usually goes. Oh, Ingrid's saying after being a victim of abuse, even after years later, I cannot hear loud voices, etc. Jay Borrego is saying, do you think those two can carry that heavy TV? Maybe that's why they had to smash it up. I don't know. Cecilia is saying that TV was already dead. I liked William Carl's comment. Look, if it was plugged in, it should have, something more should have happened there. Dennis McCall, I can't shake the feeling that Sarah has been staging these videos to set up a narrative. Oh, I agree. Not necessarily this particular incident, but I think she was taking photos and getting videos and doing everything she had to do to use as ammunition against him to either control him or take revenge on him when she wanted. We learned yesterday that she sent a letter, a big letter, to his family, denigrating him and accusing him of, some sort of relationship with these other women via his phone or via a phone. So, oh no, it was via her phone because she said it was on her phone and she said, oh, I didn't put these on here. So we know that she is vengeful. This is who she is. We know that she was vengeful toward her lawyers. So I agree that she just goes around, and I think even look back, even in the hearings, pretrial hearings, she was literally taking names. Oh, what was your name? And I think that she does that. She takes names, she collects ammunition. I think she is what we call a grievance collector, and she hangs on to all that. And she will eventually try and take revenge in some fashion. Kathy is saying control, just like locking him in the suitcase. Control and blackmail, yeah. Yeah. Third Floor Unicorn says that vid seems like a boredom activity that people who are using substances like alcohol do. I've seen it before. I've seen people who are not using substances do things like that. Heart Machine is wondering if there's search history on Sarah's phone. I think if there was something really important, one side or the other would have brought that up. So, a beautiful Bernice says that Sarah seems to be a natural bully. That's why she was able to take over Brian. Interesting. Audrey is saying the truth always finds the light. I hope you're right. Not just in this case, but in others. I've seen it not come to light too often. Iran, can the state come back and make those valid points about the TV video? I don't know. Do you think it speaks for itself? I mean, they might say something in closing. Courtney's saying, I've known 2 grievance collectors in my life. Listen, that is a big red flag. So grievance collecting by itself doesn't necessarily mean that there is going to be violence, but that potential has increased. You remember earlier I talked about justification? So when somebody is grievance collecting, that is their justification or rationalization for acting out in revenge. So if you've got a grievance collector and somebody who will act on vengeful thoughts, it's one thing to have vengeful thoughts. Yeah, I'd like to say this to him, or, oh, I want to punch him in the nose or something, but the person never does it. That's one thing. But if they act out their vengeful thoughts and they've got the grievance, they've got the justification to act things out. So Those are big red flags. If you can avoid those kind of people, do that. If you are a grievance collector yourself, you can actually get help for that and change that around, and you actually will feel better if you deal with it. Oh, Lizzie is saying, oh, I thought you meant like union grievances. No, sorry. Sometimes I do that, use a term and not explain what I mean. Sort of like, yeah, I have a grievance with you, or I'm mad at you, and I'm just going to hang on to collect all that. Every little thing you did wrong, I'm just going to hang on to all of that. And I might use that to get you later. Or I might ruminate about that and decide that you're awful or you're deserving of some sort of punishment. Oh, Ross, I'm amazed at the hours you're putting in. We really appreciate you. I appreciate you. You guys are putting in the hours right along with me. And it is so much better with you here, really. It's nice to have a two-way conversation. So I think I am going to, it's 11:35 by my clock. And court, so the jury's not coming back till 1, but court is going to start at 10 to 1. So I'm going to suggest that we come back at 12:45. If you had a notification on for the afternoon stream, that's going to change. So I have to go in there and change the time to 12:45. So I think I'm going to do that because now I have time to take Watson for a walk and have lunch. So that'll be good. I was fading away yesterday. Oh, Time Machine thinks the state's doing a terrible job. Oh, I thought it was brilliant today. We'll see. We'll see. It's not over till it's over. Thank you guys for being here. Hopefully I see you all this afternoon. I will be here. Trust your gut. Oh, and do some self-care. Take care of yourself.